In today's video, I'd like to share with you an image that I haven't released out into the world. And actually on my hard drive, there are loads of images and videos and stories to tell that simply go untold for whatever reason. Maybe I don't have enough video footage to piece together a nice film for you guys, or maybe I just don't really like the image that much to begin with, but then it grows on me over time. And today's video, or today's image, is a little bit of both. It was taken in one of the most amazing locations that I have ever had the pleasure of photographing. So I hope you enjoyed that video. It really was one of the coolest locations I've been to. It was awesome. But let's jump straight into the processing. Now I'm going to show a couple of techniques. It's nothing new, nothing I haven't shown before, and nothing that you probably haven't seen on a million other processing videos. But I think what's important when you watch people's post-processing videos and this post-processing video, it's not necessarily the techniques. Yes, of course, you have these techniques and you can then apply them to your image and better edit your image. But what's really important here is why you're applying those techniques and where you're applying them. And when you edit an image, you should be looking at a photograph, breaking it down and thinking, okay, what's important, what's not important, what do I want to highlight, and what do I want to kind of keep in the shadows, and really balancing the image. So that's what we're going to do. Anyway, we're going to look at this image and we're going to process it, and maybe you'll learn a thing or two. Maybe not. I don't know. We'll see. All right, let's just jump straight into this. So I've got the image open in Lightroom, but I'm not doing a great deal. It's just a basic edit, just getting it to a good level. So exposure, sorting out the colors with white balance, and introducing vibrance and saturation to really lift out those blues and those yellows in the mud. But as you can see, if I apply vibrance and saturation globally, it affects the mud in quite a good way that I'm happy with. But it also affects the sky, and I don't know, a grey sky that has too much blue in it, I don't like it at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to globally increase the vibrance, and then the saturation, which is going to push that even further, I'm only going to apply to the foreground with a graduated filter, pretty much, put it on upside down, and then that way the sky isn't affected too much. So that's pretty much ready to go now. So I'm going to open that in Photoshop, and then we do the real transformation. Alright, so I've got my image now open in Photoshop, and the first thing I'm going to do is break it down into different sections and look at what needs attention. Now, what I'm going to do when I edit this image is do everything locally. What that means is when you do a local edit, you just change a specific area of the photograph. When you do a global edit, you change the entire image as a oneer. So if you were to globally adjust brightness, the whole image would get brighter. If you were to locally adjust brightness, then maybe just the sky or wherever you decide will get brighter. Now what I'm going to say about my processing of this image is the only thing I'm going to do in Photoshop, the only thing, nothing else, is brighten or darken, or dodge and burn. I'm not going to do anything fancy with, I don't know, sharpness, clarity, adding mist, adding a lens flare, nothing. I'm going to transform the image just with brightness and darkness, because this is a great image. You know that I love these mud cracks. That sunken mud crack looks like a dragon's back. I think it's fantastic. So really, the location was so otherworldly that I don't need to add drama. Have you seen how much drama there is in this image? I do not need to add more drama. All I need to do is coax the image, coax the viewer into looking at the right part of the image and being drawn into the image. And the only way I'm going to do that is by either lightening areas or darkening areas. That's it. Those are the only decisions I have to make. Now, the way I'm going to do that is by using luminosity masking. Now, luminosity masking terrified me for a long time. Well, it didn't terrify me, but I never really wanted to learn it because it seemed too advanced for me. But it's really not. It's so simple, and I've talked about this on previous videos, and I may as well just go over it quickly in this video. Luminosity masking is essentially making a selection based on the luminosity values of your image. So if you make a selection of the bright areas, when you make changes, it will only affect those bright areas. Much like if you were to manually make a selection of the sky, and then anything you paint in that selection will only affect the sky, because that's the bit that you've sort of selected and drawn your lines around, your dotted lines. Oh God, I'm so good at Photoshop, honestly. But the problem with that is, within your selection of the sky, there are many different values of darkness and brightness, and maybe you don't want to darken the entire sky. On this image, I want to darken the sky, but I don't want to necessarily affect the steam coming out of that chimney. Do you get me? So that's why luminosity masking is so good. It's so good. And it's quite simple, right? I've downloaded a plugin called Lumenzia. I think it's about, oh gosh, like 30 or 40 pounds, something like that. It's not massively expensive. And it's great because there are loads of resources online of how to use it. You can even download the guy who built this, Greg Benz. You can download his courses and learn way more advanced techniques than what I'm doing. But it's very cool. So what you can do is you can basically, in one click of a button, you can have Photoshop select only the bright areas, or the mid areas, or the dark areas, or the little bit less dark areas, or the kind of 80% grey areas. So you can be very, very specific with the bits of the image that are selected, and then you can go in and you can darken them or brighten them, and it's very accurate, and it's very clean, and it's very natural looking, and most of all, you have so much control. It's phenomenal. Right, I think I've waffled on enough about luminosity masking. I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to go into this image, pick specific areas to brighten and darken, and then we're going to be done. I'm sorry for that. It feels like I've gone on a bit, but let's jump straight into this. Right, so the first part of the image that I want to sort of mess around with and get sorted out is the sky. It's a bit bright, so I'm just going to darken it. So all I'm going to do is just create a mask, and I think I'm going to go for an L2 mask, Lights 2. Let's have a look. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So Lights 2, basically what that's doing is it creates this black and white mask, and all that's doing is telling you that the white areas are active, the black areas are inactive. And what that means is when you grab a paintbrush and start painting or dodging and burning, black areas won't be affected, white areas will be affected, grey areas will be affected a bit less than the white areas. You get the point. So we've got a nice selection of the sky here, so I'm just going to make a dodge and burn layer, nice and straightforward. I'm going to pick the black brush, I'm going to have my flow set to 2 or 3%, and then I'm just going to slowly, there, just paint in the sky, and that just darkens the sky nice and cleanly, nice and naturally. Now the next bit I want to focus on is that steam coming out of the vents. See, I've darkened the sky, but I also darkened the steam a little bit, and it looks a bit flat. And I know that when I was there in real life, that steam was like, it was awesome. It was just like post-apocalyptic. Oh, it was just... So what I want to do is I want to get that feeling across in my image. So I'm going to create another mask, and I'm just concentrating on the darker bits of the steam. What I'm going to do is look at some of these darks masks, and I think Darks 2 looks pretty good. It's sort of selected. You can see there's a clear selection of that steam cloud. You can see that clearly. And let's make that selection, easy peasy. Got my black brush and just start slowly painting in, you know? You don't want to go too far, too fast, too soon. That's why I've got the flow set so low, just so you can paint over it, slowly paint over it, slowly bring out the shadows. And there we go, that has made quite a big difference, and already we can see that that steam cloud is really starting to stand out. Now let's create another mask, and instead of targeting the darker areas of that steam cloud, I'm going to target the brighter areas, make them even brighter, and then that's going to give it a really sort of 3D feeling. It's going to make it feel very, well, give it lots of depth, I suppose. So let's look at, we did darks 2, let's look at lights 2. See if that gives me a selection, which it does. All right, so lights 2 mask. I've selected the brightest pixels within the image, and obviously part of that is that steam cloud. I'm just gonna use a white brush, and I'm just gonna start painting over it. And I'm not painting over the whole cloud, I'm just looking at the brightest parts of the cloud and painting over that. And there we go, you know, again, it's very subtle, but when you turn the layer mask on and off, it really does make a big difference. I continued to make more selections, one specifically for the tiny lighthouse, which looked a bit flat and dark, so I lifted that a little bit. I also made a selection of the darker midtones around the outside of the crater, which looked a little bit flat, and by darkening that helps draw attention to the center of the image. So the next luminosity mask that I'm about to add, I think, is the most important, and that is to really lift that main subject, the dragon's back, that scaly dragon skin looking mud. That's what I want to draw the eye to. That's what I want people to look at when you see the image for the first time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a mask that's going to select the luminosity values of that sunken mud. Now it's going to be quite tricky because it's not bright, but it's also not dark. It's kind of mid. So let's try, I think we'll go for lights mid 1, which is brighter midtones. And you can see I've got like a pretty decent selection of that mud in the middle. And all I'm gonna do is just grab my paintbrush with the white, and I'm just gonna start painting in, and you can see it's not affecting the shadows and the cracks. It's only really affecting the surface of the mud, and that's it. I don't need to do a great deal. I don't need to go overboard. I don't want it to be too bright. So now that I've done that, I'm going to switch the layer mask on and off, and you can see the difference that that luminosity mask has made. Look how much more attention is brought to the center of the image where those mud tiles have been made brighter. It really does go to show how powerful luminosity masking and dodging and burning can be. It's just fantastic. Now what I'm going to do is just make one final luminosity mask where I'm going to try and make a selection of those blue tiles around the central sinkhole. And it's going to be tricky because those blue tiles, they're sort of, you know, they're midtones, are neither bright nor dark. So I'm just going to test a few different selections, but I think mids, just M should do the trick. That gives me a pretty decent selection. And now what I can do is start targeting and darkening down that blue mud. I mean, who would have thought there was blue mud anyway? But by doing this, I am bringing back a bit more color and a bit more vibrance to the blue mud, but also I'm drawing the eye further into that central sinkhole. Now let's open the image in Lightroom and do one final adjustment. So the final thing I'm going to do here in Lightroom is just add a vignette, but I'm not going to use the vignette slider. I like to have a bit more control than that. So what I'm going to do, well, first of all, I'm going to make my image appear really small by just zooming out at a 1:8 ratio. And then I'm just going to use the radial filter with my exposure all the way down to like -4 stops. And then I'm just going to draw a massive radial filter over the image and just play around with that and just add that vignette. And I think by looking at a small thumbnail of the image rather than a full-size image, it gives you a better overview of how that vignette is affecting the image. Because I love a vignette, I love it. I add one to almost every image, but they have to be subtle. If your vignette is too noticeable, then it doesn't look good. But if you do a very, very soft edge, gentle vignette, then it can look fantastic. And what this vignette is doing here is it's just drawing the eye even more towards that mud, that dragon's back, that scaly spine. That's what it's all about. And this vignette is the final touch. So there we go, that is done. We can see the before and the after image here. Okay, I need to stop the video here because I do not like my final edited image, which is quite funny because I spent all day editing the image and making this video. But a valuable lesson when processing your images is to have a break. I didn't have a break, so I thought I would finish the video. In fact, you know what? It's uploading to YouTube right now. I'm going to have to take this down. But I went away for a couple of hours, came back, and just looked at the image again and thought, you know what, I don't like it, it's too blue. So what I'm going to do is show you very, very simply how you would fix something after you've done all of that editing with all of those luminosity masks, and it's really simple. We go back to the raw file and we just warm it up a bit. Now we've got that nice warm tone that we're after, and you'll see next to the raw file I've got the edited TIFF, which is from Photoshop. Now what you can do is you can click on that and you can edit in Photoshop as you would do with any other image, but it comes up and it says edit original. It asks you if you want to edit the original, so you say yes, okay, and then what that does is it opens the original file in Photoshop with all of those layers maintained, all of those layers that you spent hours working on, they're still there. So now all I need to do is copy and paste the warmer photo on top of the cooler photo, and there we go. Everything in the image is identical because all those layers are on top of the warmer file. And I've got to say, I'm much happier with it. So when I save this, it's going to just drop it back into Lightroom. It's going to maintain my vignette that I added. It's going to maintain the quality. Everything's going to be the same, apart from it's going to have a warmer white balance rather than a cooler white balance. Right, back to the video. Better get this uploaded fast. And there we go. It was easy. It is easy. I'll link to the Lumenzia plugin below if you want to look at luminosity masking. I wouldn't be that intimidated by it. It's pretty straightforward and it does make a huge difference. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this editing video. If you have, then yeah, give it a like and subscribe and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I don't know. It's just, we're just cracking on here indoors. And yeah, having fun and getting creative. All right, well, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye for now.